Welcome to another episode of the I Work in Sports live interview. This is the show where we talk to accomplished sport business professionals who come here to share their knowledge, their experience, tips, and advice in order to help you succeed in your career. If we're just meeting, my name is João Frigerio. I'm the founder of I Work in Sport, and I want to sincerely thank you for being here with us today. If you're coming back, you know the drill. Please write in the comments just to start where you're watching from. And if you're new here, if this is your first time, you can do the same as well. This will be an interactive session, so prepare to send your comments, your questions. And if you're watching this on YouTube, we stream this on LinkedIn and on YouTube. I would appreciate it if you could hit the like button. That helps us to get to more people. A few sports disciplines have experienced faster growth than women's football in recent years. So today I'm going to talk with Elena Mirandola, who has recently started as the CEO of FC Como Women, a traditional women's-only football club recently acquired by the investment group Mercury 13. And this is her first role in professional sports, right? She actually comes from a very different industry, which is digital marketing. So we're going to talk about her transition into sport, what she brings to this new role, her vision for the club, and much, much more. So I'm going to invite Elena to join me right after this. Hello, Elena. Welcome to the show. It's really nice to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Elena, so we're going to talk about many things, as I mentioned, but this is primarily, focused on career in sport. Although I mentioned you're starting your career in sports now. You have a very successful previous one. There's all this transition process that we're super interested in knowing. So maybe before we talk more about it, let me ask you to start with a quick summary of your career, what you did before, maybe what you studied, and how you ended up coming to work in a football club.
Sure. So I'm going to start with a fun fact. I actually studied history at university. So I really started I would say my career in a peculiar way. I was very passionate about history. I was also passionate about journalism. So I did 3 years of a history bachelor degree. I started writing for a few magazines, and then I realized, the life of a journalist is extremely hard and difficult, and I didn't know if I would have gotten far with that. So I kind of pivoted and decided to take up an MBA, so a Master in Business Administration, which really gave me a 360 view over what it means, to manage a company and really being in a managerial position. So I completely, changed my my studies with, approaching more like a business type of studies. And then right after the general management MBA, I decided to actually move to London. I was born and raised in Italy, but I've always been wanting to move abroad. So I took this as an opportunity. I actually did work for 1 year in Italy, but then I decided to leave, my role in marketing in Italy and move to London. And London, back in the days, I'm talking 2007, 2008, was very, there was a lot of movement in the digital marketing space. So there were a lot of digital media agencies that were working with large organizations, supporting them in their digital marketing needs. And when I say digital marketing, my career actually started in Google advertising. So we were supporting large organizations in positioning their products and services on the Google, on the Google search engine. So even though I started a marketing career, it was very much, I would say, a data-driven activity. Because you cannot imagine, how many keywords you can bid on, and everything is related to data. So you can clearly see exactly how many people have clicked on a certain ad, and how many people have then landed on the on the brand's website, and how many people converted. So yes, it was marketing, but it was very much, I would say, a data-driven marketing. And that's when I started to really get passionate about numbers, data, and also at that point, the digital marketing field expanded into more than just Google advertising. It was, the days when Facebook started to, propose to the brands the first advertising products. And I still remember, I was working for my main client was Avis Budget Car Group, the car hire company. We were managing all of their digital marketing activities in EMEA. And I remember, I went to my client and told them, why don't we test out, some Facebook ads? And they were like, well, what is Facebook ads? What does that mean? So, it was still very much in the early days. So I worked in this agency, which was part of the WPP group for 7 years, roughly, a bit less, 6 years. And then in end of 2013, I started to get very interested in emerging markets. And that's when, I got a first connection with a headhunter who was recruiting for positions in the Middle East. And, I had no idea what it meant to work in the Middle East. I was still afraid, that there were, prejudice and stereotypes against women. So I asked a lot of questions, before starting the interview process. And, I was very pleased to see that actually the Middle East was a very international and open mind places. So I got an opportunity to move to Dubai early 2014 to work for an agency, global agency, which was starting their business in Dubai, because they had just won the Emirates airline as a global client. So I really had this opportunity to be basically employee number 3. And setting up all of the operations in the agency in Dubai alongside the general manager. So I was there for 3.5 years. And at that point, my role evolved more into, not just a subject matter expert when it comes to digital marketing, but also in business development. We really grew a portfolio of clients in the Middle East, which went, beyond Emirates. We work with Dubai Tourism. We work with, other hospitality brands. And then in 2017, I had an opportunity to actually move to Asia, still with the same company. The company was actually looking to expand the operations in Asia. And initially, the mandate I got from the global CEO was to look for a target to acquire in Asia.
Right.
So I spent, quite a few months looking for a target, an agency to acquire. And then, after few months, actually there was a change in strategy from the group, and they decided that they wanted to go for organic growth. So they asked me, how would you feel about moving to Asia and opening up, the business from scratch? And I was 32, I was very young, maybe, a little bit naive. And I was like, yeah, sure. Why not? So I moved. In 3 years, but less, it was actually 1.5 years, I opened an office in Malaysia, an office in Singapore, and an office in Hong Kong. It was very tiring, but also, a lot of experience I gained. I lost sleep for sure, but it was really great. And then after, those 3 years, in 2020, I had a great opportunity to move to Expedia Group.
Right.
And still working in the media space. So I was heading up business development for Expedia Group for their media solutions business arm. And unfortunately, I joined Expedia on the 4th of March 2020. So for whoever has worked in travel, you probably know what it means. So it was a bit of a hard start. And so anyway, long story short, for personal reasons with my husband, we decided to move back to Europe. And so after 13 years of life in London, Dubai, Asia, we actually decided to move to Milan, where I've been since 2021, and also working in in media and digital prior to joining FC Como Women.
Wow. And that's super, super impressive. I mean, what impressive career. And how did you then ended up going to, moving out to sports and going to a football team? Just before you answer, just to give you a quick, um, a view of some people already leaving messages, so you understand where people are watching from. It's a very global stream. We have Pav in Birmingham, Gianluca there in Milan, Valeria saying hi from Madrid, Sarah in Lausanne, Olivier as well. There is Fernando in Sao Paulo and Carmen Ezerenga in New York. So we're covering many time
Global.
zones here. Very, very global. Everyone interested in women's football, in your career and in this Como project. So how did you end up going to Como Women?
So I have to say I've been looking into a career in sport since a few years, mainly because I'm extremely passionate about sport. I am, well, I wouldn't say an athlete, but I practice sport. I'm a triathlete since 10 years, more or less.
Okay.
And I've always been very intrigued in, the business model behind sports. So really, not just the sporting and the performance side and element of sport, but also everything, correlated to how you grow a business. I had the chance last week to meet with the CEO of PTO, which is basically a triathlon competition, very similar to Ironman for those who know these kind of sports. And I was fascinated by the fact that these guys basically raised money, I think 2 or 3 years ago, to start basically a new competition, a new sport. So I was always very passionate about the business aspect of sport. You will probably never believe how I got this job. Because I know it's quite uncommon.
I promise I'll believe you.
So Mercury 13, who is the owner of Como Women, decided to run a very open recruitment process. They wanted to make sure they would consider candidates from different backgrounds. So they basically opened the position on LinkedIn, and I just applied. So, it was I think it's very atypical for a CEO role, but it's also a strong sign, that in a way, also for very senior positions, things need to change, because most often, you will hear someone getting a CEO role because they were, in a certain network, or they knew someone, which is not necessarily wrong, but obviously limits the possibilities, because someone like myself, who is never been into sport, most likely if Mercury didn't run an open process, would never gotten into the radar, if you see what I mean.
Right. Yeah, of course.
So yeah, that's really how I got into this role. And I think it was at the intersection of sport, which is something I'm passionate about, business, because at the end of the day it's about running and managing a P&L, but also gender equality, because we are a women-only football club. So we are strongly supporter of women empowerment, given we only have a team of female players.
Yeah, that's great. And how has this adaptation been so far, coming from I suppose a very different professional environment now into football, and especially a new club as well. For those, maybe you want to also talk a little bit about the club, which exists for a while but was recently acquired. So a big rebranding and new philosophy. So it's almost like from scratch a new club. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that and your adaptation into this world of football.
So the club has been existing for quite a few years. This is our third season in Serie A Femminile, which is the top league championship in Italy. The club was acquired by Mercury 13. The previous owner, who is still a member of the board, is a local entrepreneur. I am very impressed by how he managed to basically engage the entire community. And also from a sponsorship perspective, we had a lot of sponsors from businesses, on the ground. But obviously, with the change in the level of professionalism, now you have definitely, you know, a bar that is increasing when it comes to performance on the women's side. So obviously the team needed to take that further acceleration and step up. So with the acquisition of Mercury 13, that's exactly what, you know, was happening. So since the acquisition in March, the team has been embarking on a further professionalization journey. On one end, you know, we have invested heavily on, you know, staff. So I joined as the CEO, but together with me also a COO started, a person who has 20 over years of experience in football. And he's really, you know, my right-hand person. I work very closely with him. But we also have introduced like new people. We have a new team manager. We have a new marketing team. We have a creative director. So really, you know, we have added more expertise into the club to make sure we can execute the vision. At the same time, also we have invested significantly more on the players, but mostly on the technical staff. So the head coach, you know, the strengthening coach, etc., and on the infrastructure. So we are building a new gym. We have now, you know, changed and upgraded the medical support and the medical area. We have a nutritionist, etc., etc. So there have been really a lot of investment, but also very important on the branding side of things. So we strongly believe in the connection between the team, the club, and Como Lake, which, as we all know, is a very beautiful location and you know, attracts a lot of tourists. So we wanted to make sure that our identity was also, you know, aesthetically beautiful to reflect the location where we are based. Now, going back to your first question on the adaptation, believe it or not, it's actually going really well in the sense that at the end of the day, it's a business. So my priorities as soon as I came in were very much focused on making sure we had the right people in place, making sure we had the right, you know, financial documents and controls and checks in place, you know, making sure we have a proper marketing strategy. We know who our customer base is. We know who our audience is. And obviously, I'm getting more and more involved also with the performance side of the business. But even on that front, we have a great sporting director who comes from 20 years of experience in women football. So he's extremely knowledgeable about that area. But I have to say, obviously, on that side of the business, I'm learning every day.
And what would you say are maybe some similarities that really you think doesn't change anything from, you know, a traditional, more corporate world, or maybe I can't call it digital traditional, but you know what I mean? And perhaps some differences that you face. Oh, actually, in football, some things work very differently from what I was used to.
Something I was told when I started, can't remember who told me that, but it's actually really true. In a football club or in any, you know, sport clubs, you have to run a business with all of the challenges of running a business, and on top of that, you also have to win games. So I think there is, you know, a double level of stress because every time, you know, we show up at the stadium on Saturdays and Sundays, you also have that pressure that you have to deliver. So I would say this is probably the main difference, but it's also something that excites me, right? Because, you know, showing up at the stadium and having to look forward to the game, it's something that, you know, I personally really enjoy. But other than that, I would say, you know, there aren't really that many differences. You have customers that you have to serve somehow. You have employees, again, that expect something from the business. So it's really, you know, the exact same logics. It's really not rocket science.
And for you personally, what I imagine as well, that, you know, you go to a company or have a high position at Expedia or something like that. It's not like you meet people in the streets and they go, hey, go, we're supporting you or something like that. And probably now you sit as a CEO there in the club, and Mercury 13 are doing a great also PR work. So I imagine that you're becoming already a bit famous in the city, so people kind of recognize you and support you. Is that a big difference already in your life, or not that much yet?
I'm not sure I'm that level yet, maybe. No, but it's true though. Sometimes, at the stadium, you get someone, wanting to introduce themselves and say hi and, telling you how a big supporter they are. So yeah, it definitely happens. But for example, what I primarily take care of on top of, my CEO duties is also all of the commercial aspects. So we're obviously working on getting some big sponsors on board, and it doesn't change compare it's not very different from what I was doing before, because even when I was on the consulting side, I was liaising with tier one organizations and working on digital transformation projects, e-commerce projects, etc. So in that respect, the kind of stakeholders you talk to are not really different, I would say. So yeah, again, it depends on the role you have in the organization, but from my personal perspective, it hasn't really changed that much in terms of what I do on a daily basis.
Right, right. There's already some questions coming in. Gianluca Ruggeri sent one. Gianluca, just hold there for a bit. We're going to get to that. I want to ask you, Elena, you mentioned when we were talking before that you recently been to an event mostly with representative of a men's team. How different is it to work in a football, sort of in a women's football only club? I mean, did you, just by talking to people there, I imagine that, the whole conference, there was many more men than women. But the fact of working in a women's only team, did you already notice a difference, or not that much, just a scale? How would you, gauge that?
Yeah, so that event was actually an event not only dedicated on football, but it basically involved 50 top leaders amongst clubs, but also other sports like rugby. There was the owner of a cycling team as well as investors. So I really enjoyed it because it was very diverse and gave me good perspective, into different part of the sport business. Of course, there were a few representatives of the male football side of things. It was a great opportunity for me because it's very clear that male football is at a very mature stage. So the kind of issues that they are tackling right now are issues that I can try to avoid, because in a way someone has already made that mistakes, or in a way you can already see what the trajectory could be if you make certain decisions. So it was an extremely invaluable source of learning for me, that event, because I think in women football we can really avoid making mistakes that have been made in most matured sports, and building a completely new playbook. So this was a great learning. To your point, I mean, we were 55 people in total. We were 6 women, the rest was men.
Mm-hmm.
It is obviously an indication, but I also think, and this is something I was facing also in my career in tech. I think it really has to start from the youngest generations, because the real problem is if your parents, when they have a daughter, they don't send their daughters to engineering studies, or they kind of push against them going to economic studies, etc. That's where the problem comes. So I don't blame anyone for the fact that we were only 5 women and the rest were men. I think the problem is starting really from the early stages. So I do hope, here obviously we're all very educated in this group, I'm sure, but I really hope that if there are any men in this group with daughters, this can be an opportunity, for them to really think at stopping all of these stereotypes, because I think there are many studies that show that girls and boys have exactly the same opportunities when they start, when they are super young, but it depends on how each one of them get raised, and that will obviously define their career. So I think we really have to start from the bottom.
Yeah, listen, I mean, traditionally, obviously, football is viewed as a men's world. I think that is obviously changing. I mean, when we talk about leadership, right, membership in boards and things like that, definitely, I think we notice some change. Maybe not enough yet, but if we take, well, you in a leadership position there as CEO, okay, it's a women's team, but where I come from in Brazil, we have a woman president of the currently most successful team in Brazil for the past few years. So, but definitely still much less than men. But I think you can sense a change there. I just want to know your thoughts, although you just came into the role. What are your thoughts about the pace of that this change is happening? Do you think it's okay? It really takes time. It's a step by step, or should we do something to accelerate it somehow? Do you have any views on that yet?
I think we will experience a very rapid growth when it comes to women football in the next 2 to 3 years. And I'm seeing, and we're all seeing what is happening in the US, what is happening in the UK. I'm pretty sure, Italy will follow very soon. And, male football had the time to grow slowly over decades. Whereas I think, women football will have a significant rise in the next 2 to 3 years, also because of some regulatory changes that were made. For example, in Italy 2 years ago, finally, female footballers could become, professional. So there was an introduction of professionalism. So they now have an official, regulated contract. So I really believe there will be a significant increase, especially, on the also on the level of performance that we will see in the in the foreseeable future. I also think, and this goes back to what I was saying before, we need to start working when they are very young. So we still see we run like the academy, so the youth academy, and then we also run a team for those that are between 6 to 10 years old. So the academy, which goes, between 13 and 19 years old, the academy is actually growing more and more and more, because we get a lot of players also that want to come from, because that's almost like into professionalism. Whereas, if you are between 6 and 10, that's really your first, start into football. And I was chatting yesterday to our, head of the youth division, and he was telling me, actually, in the group, that goes between 6 and 10 years old, we only have 8 girls, because this is really not the first sport that you can think of when you want to sign up your daughter, for do some sort of physical activities. So I think that is the level where we have to do some work. But at the same time, when you take the 13 years old and above, at that level, it's growing super fast. So it's more like on two different levels, I would say.
Yeah, and I think probably it's nice to point out as well. I think projects like Mercury 13th, their own rights, because as I understand, it's a fund created to invest in women's football only, right? We hear about MCOs, right? There's multi-club ownerships. This, as I understand, is a plan that they have with Como Women's being the first in their portfolio. Yeah. But really, that's a vision of investing in women's sport only, right? And definitely, I think it's a growth market. So I imagine there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, and for those who are interested in women's sports, I would strongly advise to take a look at the Visa study, which was published 4 days ago, which is very specific on the benefit for commercial sponsors on investing in women's sports, and specifically football. So Visa has been heavily investing into women football since I think 2021, if I'm not mistaken, and they have shown clear numbers and results of what was the impact on brand recognition, brand recollection, etc. for Visa following the investment in women's sports. And at the same time, something that I particularly like about that research is the identification of reasons for a female fans who follow a women team. in remaining a fan. So it seems like 33% of the people that decided to follow a club, a female club, is because they want to support women's sports. And this number becomes 49% of the ones that decide of remain a fan because they want to keep supporting women's sport. It's very different compared to the motivations that drive men to follow a male football club. There, you have a whole lot of motivations related to, this is the team of my grandfathers or my father, or this is my local team, etc. Whereas for women's sport, there is a very strong correlation with association of values. So women decide to follow women's sports because they believe in women's sport and they want to support it. So it's very deep, I think, in terms of reasoning to decide to follow a specific team.
Right. I will definitely look for that report. If I don't find it, I'll ask you to send me the link.
Yeah.
Just one thing, actually, I forgot to ask you when we were talking about, the number of women currently working in sport. I think you mentioned something when you compare with the previous industry that you were, like in digital, is it much different? Is there many more women like working in digital, or almost comparable? How do you compare those two worlds?
It depends a little bit how we define digital. So when you talk about digital media and digital marketing, I would say there is a quite high percentage of women. When you start getting into the more like tech engineering aspects of digital, which requires, like, as I mentioned before, let's say, IT studies, engineering studies, that kind of, math as well. There is where you definitely see a much lower percentage of women.
Right. Listen, let me ask you a question here from Gianluca Ruggeri, who's in Milan. He says, so which skills from your history degree and MBA are most useful in your role now? Or have your experiences in London or in the Middle East had a greater impact? Or what really shaped your leadership the most? I think we're talking about skills here. If I can summarize, what are the main skills needed to run a professional football club, at least the ones that you gathered throughout your career?
I think in terms of skills, you need to be good at prioritizing. I mean, this applies to every job, really. So I don't think it's necessarily, this job. But I can tell you, in my position, there can be a huge amount of distractions, and if you don't pay attention to how you manage your time, you can get completely derailed. So the skill of really learning how to prioritize and manage your time, it's something really important. I mean, I still build blocks in my diary to make sure, if let's say I have a morning without any meetings, I don't start, getting into activities that would derail my focus. So I think really the ability of prioritizing being focused is a very important skill. I also strongly believe in empathy and being able to read the audience and read also the people that work for you. And that is definitely something that you learn with time. So I think it's part of the experience. But I think if I interpret Gianluca, I think question correct.
Yeah, Gianluca.
I'll
put it on the screen again.
Yep. Okay. So I'm personally someone who is more like a learner by doing rather than learning by reading. I'm actually reading or studying. I'm actually pretty bad at studying, and my attention span tend to be quite short. So I think 80% of my leadership skills come from the fact that I had to solve a lot of problems. And especially, when you move from London to the Middle East and then from the Middle East to Asia, and you have to literally fix a lot of issues that you were not seeing coming because simply you didn't know that things were working in a certain way. then you learn that you shouldn't be taking anything for granted. And also something that I always think, it's important is to make sure there are no misunderstandings. So I really like to write everything down, making sure, the objectives and the KPIs are clear, especially when, it's a case of managing a team. So yeah, I hope I have answered your question, but personally, it's been much more the experience rather than my studies.
Yeah, I think it did 100%. And in fact, and how do you balance what we call work-life balance? I mean, I know that in football it's really difficult because you have games at nights and during the weekends. There's
Yep.
always something happening. But how are you dealing with that? And again, always trying to draw comparisons with your previous career, also because you're fresh here, and then we also talking with people that want to maybe transition from their current career into sports. So
Yeah, so I never really had a 9 to 5 jobs, but you're absolutely right. And when you get into sport, you have games on Sundays, on Saturdays, and it gets a bit tricky. Um, I have a non-negotiable in my life, which is actually sport. So I do want to make sure that I get at least 1 hour I get 1 hour every day to train. Now I'm not planning to race this year. I usually do a few races during the year, but this year I'm not planning to race. But I still want to, train 1 hour every day. And what I typically do is really plan, my time super carefully. And I also, start planning 1 week before, even if, on a certain week, I don't have any meetings yet. I put blocks in my diary because I know, for example, 7 to 8, I want to, go on a bike ride, or I want to go on a run. And so I'm very jealous of my time, very, very jealous. I usually train in the morning because I know in the evening things, can go south and you don't really control it anymore.
yeah, yeah.
So I prefer, to train in the morning, also give me an extra boost. But yeah, I'm very, very jealous of my time.
Very good, very good. There's another question here. Aaron is watching us from Bangkok. It says, as a CEO of a sports team, how do you balance talents and performance? Just like any other job on paper, but what are the different nuances? Uh, you mentioned that, so obviously you're not really involved with the performance side of on the pitch sports. So maybe that it was that his question. I don't know if you would like to add anything to that.
Well, I mean, it's true. I'm not the person. I mean, there is, a team dedicated to evaluating the players and decide how to build, the roster of players. But I am obviously, chatting to the players every now and then, also because I really wanted to meet them, one to one. So I've started doing these one to one, and you obviously have a performance aspect when you decide to get a certain player, but you also have certain characteristics in a player that you want to build a certain balance in the team. So there are players, for example, that are maybe from a performance perspective, they are slightly less strong, but they have a mental maturity which can definitely be useful, in the whole balance of the team. So we try to look at these aspects as well. We know that someone coming from for example, from a very important club will probably bring more maturity compared to a young player who perhaps, is super fast on the pitch, but maybe she has less maturity. So I think, again, it's not really that different compared to the business world. You always have to combine performance, motivation, and also the positive impact that a certain person can have on a wider team.
Right, right. Just a shout out here to Francois watching us from Geneva here in Switzerland, and Alexander in Nigeria as well, saying hi. Elena, so I imagine that many, or at least a few people watching this, either now or the replay, might be interested in potentially going and working for the club. So can you tell us about the plans on that front? You mentioned you mentioned, obviously, you were, I think, one of the first ones to be recruited with, I think, a deputy CEO or COO. You're, imagine, forming a team. How much of this is done? How much will still hire in the future? What people can expect? So they follow your websites looking for maybe opportunities, or LinkedIn as well, you mentioned, right?
Yeah. So look, we still have some areas of the business where we are working with third parties. So eventually I will look into internalizing some of these areas. Obviously now we're working by priority. So I'm really trying to tackle, the most imminent priorities. But, as we grow, there will be, areas that, for obvious reasons, we will be looking at internalizing. The marketing area is an area where we will be growing for sure. On this one, actually, we are looking for a video maker. So if you know any video makers in Como or in Milan, that's definitely something we would be interested in. I would be interested in hearing. But yeah, and obviously beside that, there is the performance side of the business, meaning the technical stuff and obviously the players as well. So we do get quite often agents contacting us with some suggestions on new players. So that's obviously an area that is ongoing and it's always in development. I don't know if there are any football players in the podcast, but yeah.
Well, I know a few female football players that are quite good. Actually, send them your way. I'm sure that I'm sure that they are already very much aware. More on the marketing side, and also if you on the admin management. If you need help to promote that, send that to me. I'll be sure to send that on iworkinsport.com as a gift, as a thank you for you to participating here with us. But do you see now when you look for people to come and work with you, say a bit closer to you on the management team, is there particular skills that you look for?
So I think I kind of mentioned it before. The ability of solving problems is definitely a key skill, and also something that I tell my team very often is, don't bring me a problem, bring me a solution. I had a meeting 2 days ago, with a certain area of the business where, yeah.
Preach.
Because I have my problems, right? So I don't need also your problems. So I think everyone should be working on their problems. No, I'm joking. Of course,
No, that's not a joke. This will become a highlight. It will become a short, so people understand. Good one.
No, but look, I think also having a positive attitude is super important, because if you start a meeting telling what the problems are, I mean, I know we have to solve problems, but at the same time, you have to think what you want to achieve, where you want to go, and then of course, we'll get into the problem side. But first of all, you need to think, okay, where I want to go, what I want to achieve, and then the problem is a collateral, thing that you will have to solve, of course. So I'll give you an example. I had a meeting with the team who looks after the academy, and I specifically started the meeting saying, okay, today I want to brainstorm about our academy strategy for the next couple of years. I don't want to start with problems. So they were all like looking at each other saying like, oh, okay. So it was obviously, I think, a little bit difficult for them, because probably they were already thinking we're going to throw a lot of issues on the table, but I didn't want to start, with that. And I think keeping a positive attitude is super, super important. And I particularly admire also, the American mindset of thinking big. We Italians very often tend to think about all of the limitations, and we don't think about the opportunities. So for me, it's important to work with people that, see the glass half full, not always half empty, and try to look at the bright side of things.
No, that's great. Well, I think this kind of cover what was going to be my next question, because I wanted to ask you about key advice you would give to someone that is starting or wanting to start a career in sport? So apart from that mindset of trying to think of solutions instead of fixing on problems, any other advice you'd give?
I think in general, being on top of what is happening in the sport world is super important. And now, I'm probably saying something very obvious, but following people on LinkedIn that often post, key insights or trends around sport. I think that's, I would say, something very easy to do. Everyone can do it, but also very valuable. I do follow actually a few people that have great insights on sport, and I find it useful. Obviously, I don't think it's a problem for the people in today's session, but in general, I still know here in Italy a lot of people that don't speak English. So investing on perfectioning your English skills, I think it's super important. And you have platforms like Duolingo. So you don't really need to take a lot of expensive courses. So yeah, I would say just making sure you are on top of the latest sport innovations, because sport now, I think it's really, apart from women football, but it's really developing, and there are some new sports emerging. I'm thinking, the Kings League, for example, which is a new way of interpreting, football. We actually partner last month with an organization called E1 Series, which is basically a motorboat competition, but these boats run on electric engine. And this is a totally new sport which started 3 years ago. It's super cool, by the way, because the teams are owned by celebrities. We actually had the chance to meet with Will Smith and Nadal, etc. So it was really cool. But yeah, apart from that, there are new emerging trends in sport, and not just trends, but new sports. So for someone who is keen to to learn more about it, I think just keeping eyes open is definitely useful.
No, this is really, really great. And for you, what's the importance of, say, formal education? I don't know if you're already familiar, now that you started recently your position, but there are several, say, master's programs in sports management, that type of thing. Are you familiar with them already? Or if we expand from sports specific, if we talk about really having some sort of formal training or studying, maybe focusing sport or whatnot, how do you view, how important is that? Say, with a recruiter head, if you're thinking of someone to come in and joining your team.
I think if, like, for the youngest generations, if they already have in mind that they want to work in sport, it definitely helps. Like, I'll give you an example. Our press officer, she has just completed a master in communication in sport, and I can clearly see that she also had hands-on experience before, but I can clearly see that she had that background and that understanding of dynamics of what it means to run a communication strategy for a sport and for a football club. So if you already know that that's the career that you want to pursue, I think it makes a lot of sense to have the right education. But I also wouldn't want people to say, oh, because I didn't study that, then I cannot get into sport, because again, going back to the point on sport clubs developing, there will be more and more needs for people that come from a digital background, a marketing background. I know the CMO of an important football club, and he came from Google. So, it's really not exclusive. And you can actually, from a non-sporting background, come from a non-sporting background. So it doesn't have to feel like a limitation.
Great. There's another very interesting question from Gianluca here. He asks, with focus on sustainability in sports, what initiatives has Como Women taken to integrate ESG criteria? How do you see the club positioning itself as a leader in women's football sustainability? And Camille already commented that he found a very good question. So
Well, the fact that we are a women-only football club, I think it's already a strong sign, that we are essentially fighting a battle for gender equality. And I really want to make sure, it's clear for the audience here. We don't have the resources of a mixed gender club, right? Like I don't get to reutilize or shift the resources or the sponsorship money I get from the male side of the business into the female side of the business because I don't have a male team, simply. So everything we do, it's really focused on the female players, their development, making sure they can excel, from a performance perspective, but also as an individual, and that's why we focus a lot on their nutrition plans. Now we started this one-to-one coaching with a nutritionist. So I think that just, the project that we are running by definition is an ESG project, because if we prove to the world that this project works, it really transcends football. It has, it can be applied to a lot of different businesses. I think the key message here is women don't need men to exist, right? I mean, they do in a way, but you know what I mean? Like it's in especially in a business context, etc. There has always been an association between, women and men, whereas here what we want to prove is women can exist on their own and they can excel, on that path. So I think that's a very strong sustainability message.
Yeah, that's great. I agree. There's a sort of follow-up question on what you were saying from Tom Pohio here. He says, do you have any advice for men that want to work in women's football at a professional level? Apparently, he has been told that his gender could be a barrier, but I wouldn't think so. But how do you view that?
Absolutely no. And especially because if you build an environment which is only made of women, then again, you're missing, the half of the world perception. So I think it's super important to create balanced teams. And this, it's not just about gender, but also ideally, I would love to have more and more international team. For example, we have a creative director who comes from Spain, and I love the fact that she also brings different perspective into the business. So no, I personally, I can obviously speak for myself and the club. I don't see this as an issue at all.
Great, great. Listen, Elena, I know that you have a hard stop in a few minutes, so I want to be conscious of time. I have, I think, two more questions here. Easy ones to wrap up. I usually ask those to my guests. I want to know, even before you joined Como, or maybe after, what was your favorite sporting moment? Anything that comes to mind?
Okay, I know this is super niche, but this is a moment that really made me cry. So I follow triathlon and I followed Ironman competition. And when Lucy Charles Barley, who is, she's a very popular triathlete, when she won Kona and she did, the world record last year, that was really, a heartbreaking moment for me, because I know, she went through injuries. She had a lot of issues also, with her nutrition, etc. But she was like super stubborn and really wanted to win and get this world record. So yeah, that was a great example for me of resilience in sport and not giving up.
Great, great. I think we still have time for one more. Pav just sent an interesting one here. He says, Ivan Gazidis made a good point of football clubs that are also content business, right? So with men's teams having lots of social media content, does it make it harder for women's football to cut through to average fan? I understand that you have a super important project on that, really, with a lot of attention to your social media and all that, but maybe you can expand and answer, Pav.
Yeah, I love this question because, to be honest, this is the battle that we are fighting right now, is to reach a broader and broader audience and do this through social media and digital channel. I know not everyone, are lucky enough to come to Como and watch the games. So what we want to do is to give everyone the possibility and the opportunity to follow the club from abroad, from outside. And that's why we are heavily investing into building content, making sure, we talk about the stories of our players. We are really trying to establish a connection between the fans and the players and the life at the club. So that's also the direction that we are taking right now.
Very good, very good. And the last one from me, it's one that I ask pretty much everyone here before we go. Do you have a book that you'd like to recommend to the audience, or a podcast, or a YouTube channel? Anything that would be a nice recommendation to the audience?
Yeah, so I listened to this podcast actually just a few days ago, and it's the story of Caroline Tisch, who basically is the owner of Gotham Football Club. The podcast is called She Pivot, and
Okay.
when she was describing and talking through her story, I felt like, wow, this sounds like mine. Like, I mean, of course, she's running a much bigger club than us, but her story is very similar to mine. She also came from a consumer world, and she then all of a sudden, got into the sport world. So if you like, this kind of content, I think this would be an interesting podcast to listen to.
Brilliant, brilliant. This is great, Elena. Thank you so much for doing this. Grazie mille. It was stato un piacere. So good to it's so good to have you here. I want to tell everybody that next week we have another woman, a leader in sports. We're going to be talking to Rebecca Hopkins, CEO of the S7E8 group. I have to confirm the date. I'm looking at it, but I think it's Thursday on October 3rd. So yeah, Elena, again, thank you so much. If you have positions that you would like us to promote to our audience, let me know. I'll be happy to share that with everyone. And yeah, and good luck with the beautiful project that you're running, that you're in charge of. Send my regards to Luis. I was just sending him a message before. I met him last week, and I'll hopefully have him in the show as well very, very soon. Ciao, arrivederci,
so
Elena.
Ciao,
Grazie. Stay just 1 second until I finish this.
Yeah.
1 minute. Bye bye, everyone.